5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to a very busy, very excited paddock here at the Albert Park circuit. We've just watched qualifying to set the grid for the Australian Grand Prix, and it was McLaren who took a 1-2. They've locked out the front row for the first time at the Australian Grand Prix since 2012, and that is a very long time because that predates my time in Formula One. I'm Rosanna Tennant. We're going to look back at that qualifying session with the BBC's lead commentator Harry Benjamin and former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley. Guys, we were all so pumped up for this qualifying session. I think it delivered. Would you agree, Harry?
I think I can just about hear you over the music in the background, but yes, I think it did deliver massively. I mean, it kind of feels like we're where we were at the end of last year. It was tight then, and it's still tight now. Less than a tenth separating the two McLarens to begin with, and it was nip and tuck with who would be behind them, and we had some midfield surprises as well, out-qualifying the established teams. And I'm glad it has kind of delivered because we really did give it the big sell.
We did, yeah. It would have been really disappointing if it's been an absolutely flat session today, but it really wasn't. It was exciting from start to finish. The gaps were very small. I think that sets us up not only for a great weekend, but a great season ahead.
It really does. I think people are genuinely excited about the prospect of what's to come this season. So it was Lando Norris who took pole position ahead of his teammate Oscar Piastri. Of course, we're in Australia. I think there are a few broken hearts out there in the grandstands who hoped that Oscar Piastri might be able to deliver pole position. And it was close. At one point, I really thought Piastri had it. And then Norris went and took it by 0.084 of a second, Harry.
Well, you know what? Both McLarens put unnecessary pressure on themselves in the final part of Q3. In the first lap for Oscar Piastri, coming out of the penultimate corner, went deep, put a wheel onto the grass, lost a huge chunk of time. Lando Norris had his first lap time in Q3 deleted, so only really had one chance to do it. So in the end, they had to both make it count. They had the advantage. That McLaren still does have the pace advantage over the rest of the field. But, okay, Australian hearts have been broken so far today, but that doesn't rule things out for tomorrow, and I think actually it makes it really spicy for the race tomorrow, but because so much was said last year about Lando Norris's race starts and can he be consistent with getting going on lap one, there is a decent overtaking opportunity into turn one and then again into turn three for Oscar Piastri in the Grand Prix. It's not over until it's over. I think this sets us up for a nice dice.
And throw into the mix the possibility that it could be raining.
And that.
Which is mad because we're currently sitting here, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, guys, but sweating profusely in 34-degree heat here in Melbourne. It's been incredibly hot all weekend long, but at the moment there's such cloud cover. It feels so close. As you say, Mark, it's inevitable. It's got to rain. It's got to burst this bubble, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, but actually it was those temperatures today that fluctuated a little bit and kept climbing as the day went on, and I think it really made an impact on how the tyres behaved on the circuit itself. Some of the teams almost running out of performance, some of the drivers running out of performance in the final sector. I think that's what happened to Oscar Piastri on his lap. That's why he overstepped the mark at the last moment before crossing the finish line, and that cost him time. These temperatures were really quite brutal today, so I think a little bit of cloud cover and some rain tomorrow and some lower temperatures might even completely change the picture.
Well, as we came into this weekend, the first weekend of the 2025 F1 season, a lot of people had billed McLaren as the favourite. So I asked our first pole sitter for this year, Lando Norris, if it was a nice surprise to be on top or whether he'd expected to be there.
I mean, we were expecting to be up there. I think I'd be lying if I said we weren't expecting to be towards the top. But we probably expected a little bit more of a challenge from Ferrari. I think everyone did, not just us. Ferrari have been just as quick as us the whole weekend. But definitely when we kind of gone, taken that last bit of fuel out in quali, and when you just have to push 5% extra, it definitely seemed to come our way a bit. We had a nice little gap to the rest of the cars behind us. So it's a good thing. It shows the car's working very well. It's still very tricky and a bit nervous and a bit on edge. But when it clicks and when you get a ride, it's very fast. So plenty of things to work on, but enough for today and enough to get a 1-2. So I think as a team we're very, very happy.
There are going to be plenty of challenges tomorrow. Of course, there's forecasted rain, but what's the biggest challenge, the rain or having your Australian teammate lining up alongside you on the front row?
I think both. Both, because Oscar's quick, so I think the bigger question mark for everyone is what the weather's going to be tomorrow. it's easier to figure out the driving bit and make sure I just focus on a good start and a good turn one. But you can only prepare so much for that, and you have to prepare a lot more for the weather, the inters, the wet tires, how are they going to perform, how are they going to wear out, how many pit stops you're going to be doing, like will it dry out quickly, will it not, because it's still quite warm. So there's a lot of questions for everyone tomorrow, but only time will tell.
Good luck.
Thank you.
That was Lando Norris talking to me a little earlier on, just after the qualifying session. He said coming into this season that he's a more complete driver now. I think that's on account of what he had to deal with going up against Max Verstappen last year, trying to vie for the title. We're seeing a complete Lando Norris, and also maybe a more confident Lando Norris, Harry.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, look, we've only had one qualifying session of the new season so far.
That's one sample, I'll take it.
Exactly, and the guy he had those real overtakes and dices with is just behind him in third. Max Verstappen. We'll come on to him, but
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert! If you didn't see qualifying, sorry. But I think this is I think Lando has to lay down a marker here from day one. I really do. It's all well and good playing nicey nice as they did last year. You know, here's the Qatar sprint win, Oscar. Thanks for giving me Sao Paulo. That doesn't work in Formula One. Lando Norris needs to prove that he is a world champion, and this could be.
So does Oscar.
Well, there you go. This is the thing, right? And Oscar Piastri is looked after by Mark Webber, who famously said, "Not bad for a number 2 driver." He will not want Piastri to be a number 2. Piastri will not want that. But Lando Norris has a huge weight on his shoulders in showing that he can mount a consistent challenge when he's given the car to do so. And he has to be within the title fight for the whole year and lay the marker down.
I think that's absolutely true, but I stand by what I said. I think Oscar is in exactly the same position, because what McLaren could end up having this year is a challenge on their hands where the title might end up being between their 2 drivers. And you go back through history, there are multiple occasions when that's happened and it's ended in tears. I mean, I can tell you that from experience. Go back to 2007. My 2 drivers at McLaren then, one of which was Lewis, one was Fernando Alonso, fell out to such a level, the team destroyed itself and we didn't win anything. So that's a very real risk here. So from both drivers' point of view, they don't want to end up being the second of those 2 drivers, because McLaren might end up having to make a decision between the 2 at some point in the season over which one they want to favour. They've both got to get their elbows out off the start line tomorrow and stake a claim now.
Ding dong.
Yes, exactly. You don't want to miss this one. So Oscar Piastri will start from P2 alongside his teammate, with hundreds of thousands of people cheering him on. Is that an extra boost, a little bit of extra horsepower, or added pressure? I mean, both of these McLaren drivers have got pressure on, haven't they?
An Australian's never won their home Grand Prix before in the modern era, that you go back to a non-championship race and you can prove me wrong on that stat. But I think that is going to be something. There is a huge amount of Oscar Piastri love here. You walk around the streets of Melbourne and he's become suddenly an ambassador for this supermarket and an ambassador for here. His face is everywhere.
Have you had his burger?
I did have his burger.
Ooh,
a healthy burger. I had the healthy chicken burger.
With the carrot?
With the carrot, yes. I'm not normally a fan of carrot in a burger, but we rolled with it, and it was all right.
I was describing the burger to someone. I haven't actually eaten it, so I'm glad you have. And I was saying, it's got carrot in, which is a bit of a... And I went, oh, hang on, it's orange. Oh, that's why. I see what he's done there. Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
very clever marketing from Piastri.
Yeah, no, they know what they're doing.
Colour coding a burger. Who'd have thought of it?
But I think now that Daniel Ricciardo is gone, and he was such a huge character and brilliant for the sport, brilliant for Australia. Oscar Piastri has picked up the mantle, but he's a completely different character to what Ricciardo was as well. So he has to show that he is the man that a whole nation can get behind. But equally, the British audiences love him as well, because he's got that dry sense of humour. He's spent so long growing up in the UK too. So I think there's going to be a little bit of fans that are caught in the middle across the year of which one do we go for. I think as long as we get out and out racing, and I don't want to see any driver hindered when it comes to team orders. I think you can't even think about that. It's a long season, 24 races. You've got to let them race it out. The one thing I will just say, if you cast our minds back to Monza last year, that if something happens into turn 1, into turn 3 of lap 1, and that allows another driver to take advantage of one of the McLarens, and ultimately that's a net loss, that's something they have to try and manage somehow.
But do you think they're going to have some form of rules of engagement for tomorrow, Mark? Because surely you've got to almost lay it down right at the start. Look, There's a lot at play, a lot at stake here, guys.
Yeah, but you know, at this stage, the only rule should be don't hit each other. And that's it, really. And I'm sure that is the case at McLaren. They both are on the front row of the grid. They're both going to desperately want to win this race because that lays down an early mark, as we said earlier on. And they will get their elbows out. So good, hard racing, I think, is fine. And McLaren will even encourage that at this stage. They just can't hit each other. And that's the simple rule every team instills in their drivers, but it's never more important than right here when you've got two drivers sitting right on the front row together.
Well, it was super close between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Ultimately, Piastri will start from P2. I asked him if he thought back on that lap, whether there was anything he could have done to have found an extra 100th or 10th, and this is what he had to say.
Honestly, not immediately, which I think is probably a good thing. Yeah, obviously, an extra few hundredths would have been nice, but ultimately, I've been very happy with how I've driven so far, and I think the way I've built up through the weekend's I've been happy with. I think the first lap of Q3 was a bit scrappy, but I think it was the same for everybody, and yeah, ultimately, the last lap in Q3 I was happy with. So yeah, obviously a bit of a shame that it wasn't quite enough, but I'm leaving today pretty happy.
And you're going to start on the front row of the grid for your home race. How do you protect yourself from now until the race starts so that you're not distracted and you can get the job done?
Probably a whole bunch of marketing activities. Yeah, I mean, just to try and get a good night's sleep. You know, I think that's the nice thing about being at home. Yes, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of fans, but I think they're always very, very respectful of our time and that we're here to work. You know, we have a lot of sport here in Melbourne, so I think people understand that. So I don't think I necessarily have to protect myself, but yeah, obviously just try and get a good night's sleep. And yeah, I mean, the last time I thought about turn one and trying to do well, it ended up pretty well, so maybe I'll do the same.
Good luck. That was Oscar Piastri, the home hero here in Melbourne. Grew up just down the road from the Albert Park circuit, which is where we are talking to you from. And as you can hear, the music is pumping. There are so many people staying on to enjoy the delights of the Australian hospitality. I can see lots of people drinking lots of lovely cool drinks. It's not making me jealous at all, guys. I don't know about you. But there's such a wonderful atmosphere here in Melbourne. So good to be back for the season opener, isn't it?
Oh, I always think this is the place we should be starting a season. I'm so pleased that we are back here because even over all of my years of working at McLaren, this was generally where we started, and it has this great vibe, not only here at the circuit, but even just down the road in the city. The whole city almost embraces Formula One for the weekend, and I feel like that's always how it should be. So it feels like the right place to start a great season.
And if you're watching Formula One or listening to Formula One from Europe, of course, the nostalgia that comes with the Australian Grand Prix being first, getting up in the middle of the night to tune in. You know, finally the Australians have it their way. Of course, they have to do that for the other 23 races of the year. But that's so nostalgic, isn't it, Harry? I know you found that when you were growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, you know, setting the alarm and dragging myself downstairs to switch on the telly or the radio in the living room and have a listen and a watch of what was going on in Formula One, because it had been off the back of such a long winter, and you know, back in those days, not that it was that long ago, but you know, there wasn't as much news and articles written about Formula One in the off season, so you didn't know that much. But I think that's what makes this weekend so good as well, is we live in this world where everything is absolutely reported within a second of it having, yet we still have a million questions that needed to be answered. And even though we've had qualifying and the first glimpse of what the pecking order could be, there's still loads more questions that we have no idea the answers to. There were some outstanding performances up and down the grid in qualifying that leads us to even more enthralling action tomorrow, hopefully.
Well, we may have answered the question of, you know, where are McLaren? They have established themselves right at the front with that front row lockout. But there was a big question mark over Red Bull coming into this weekend. The team saying they weren't really happy with the car they brought to Bahrain. They'd obviously wanted to make some tweaks coming into this weekend, and yet they were hampered with a few issues, some reliability issues on Liam Lawson's side of the garage, maybe some performance issues too. And Max Verstappen, I think, just never happy until he's got a car absolutely 100%, and maybe even always searching for 105%, which doesn't really exist, and I'm sure stresses the team slightly, because will they ever deliver the perfect car for him? But he well and truly got himself stuck in there today, which I don't think people were expecting, Mark. So many people thought it would be Ferrari and McLaren, but there we go. Max Verstappen, P3 on the grid.
They do this so often, don't they? They sort of, on a Friday, they quite often have some struggles. It's not quite perfect, and we all question the picture. And then on Saturday, when it really matters, Max Verstappen always turns up and delivers something special. I think the problem that Red Bull are clearly going to have in the short term here is that they've got exactly the same challenge they had at the end of last year, where one driver's right at the front and one is right at the back. Let's give Liam Lawson some credit. He's effectively a bit of a rookie, certainly new to that team. So he's got a lot of learning to do, but he certainly hasn't delivered the step forward they were hoping after Checo Perez left last year.
No, he finished the session P18, so far away from his teammate Max Verstappen. But I think the feeling in the paddock and maybe at the team is that he owned it. He said it was his mistake, whereas perhaps last year, Sergio Perez had a tendency to get out of the car and blame the car, wouldn't take kind of ownership of some of the mistakes. And so perhaps we're seeing a new type of number two driver at Red Bull, and hopefully that'll help him turn this dodgy seat into maybe a positive experience and a good opportunity. You're looking at me like you don't believe it, Harry.
No, I believe what you're saying. I hope that happens, because I just don't want another young, talented driver to have made the step up too soon and then get cast aside and be worse off for it. You know, there was a prime opportunity Red Bull had here of managing this better than they actually did. And who knows, we could all next week in China, Liam has a much smoother weekend, but right now it just hasn't gone his way. He's going to be starting at the back. In a way, the pressure is slightly off in that case, because he's had power unit troubles. He's at the back. In fact, to be honest, the majority of the rookies had a bit of a rough weekend already, so it's jumping into the deep end. But I think he just needs to focus on completing the race tomorrow and having a smooth time and getting that valuable data. I think the Red Bull is not an easy car to drive for any driver that's not Max Verstappen, because ultimately the car is built around him and his wishes and his driving style. So Lawson will have to adapt and find his own way forward, and his main goal surely now has to just be clean start, pick up some positions, try and get into the points and complete 58 laps.
Meanwhile, his teammate starts well and truly up the road. P3 for Max Verstappen. Let's hear how he reflected on that qualifying session.
I think it was better than expected, but still, of course, we're lacking quite a bit. But compared to yesterday, I think we did a good job.
Can you take it on another step for tomorrow, and what does this mean for the rest of the season?
Difficult to say. Tomorrow, hopefully, with the weather, it makes everything a little bit more difficult for everyone. But we'll see. I think we just have to get the season underway, see where we're at, and we'll learn. Constantly with this car, and hopefully we can bolt on also a bit more performance.
That was Max Verstappen, P3 for him, of course, the reigning world champion, but he didn't expect to be on pole and will settle for P3, perhaps actually fairly happy with that result. Behind him, it's the lead Mercedes of George Russell, who told me earlier that they've gone all in for qualifying because it is very difficult to overtake here at Albert Park Circuit. So do we expect them to fall away, in fact, tomorrow?
Well, if that's what he's saying, then yes. What he's talking about is favouring through their setup a car that is quicker over one lap than it might be in a race where you need it to look after tyres a little bit. Of course, we do expect rain tomorrow, so maybe that's what they've got, half an eye on. But George was able to deliver a pretty strong lap, really, from a Mercedes that I don't think we thought was going to be right up there. And to be as close as he was, I thought was actually pretty fair. So if they went for qualifying, maybe it paid off, because without that, maybe they'd have been further back.
Talking of rain and the weather that we might be expecting tomorrow, I don't know about you guys, but I felt just a couple of spots of rain.
I just thought that as well.
Can't decide whether it's dripping off a tree and it's sap or something, or I don't know, something's going on.
I don't know if it's the foliage.
Yes, such a beautifully leafy paddock, isn't it?
Is,
so lovely coming here. Smell of the flowers.
Can we hear the Kookaburra laugh? That's the crucial sign.
You might have to wait to the end of the podcast for that one. So George Russell P4 ahead of, I think, the surprise of qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda in the newly named Racing Bulls. Did anyone see that coming? He just sort of suddenly found himself in P5.
Well, you know what? Throughout the weekend so far, both Racing Bulls had been up there, Tsunoda and Hadjar. But I think everyone always takes that with a bit of a pinch of salt and thinks, they're just trying to maybe go a bit lighter on the fuel and get themselves up there. But clearly they've got a bit of a decent car under them. And when it comes to one lap, we'll see what they've really got over the long run pace. But for Tsunoda, coming back to our chat on Red Bull, I mean, that lays down a point, doesn't it? The man they overlooked has managed to stick the junior team, the sister team, in the top 5 ahead of 2 Ferraris. And Hadjar had a pretty decent run out for a first rookie as well in the session. I'm sorry, but if you're Yuki Tsunoda, you're smirking at Helmut Marko at that one, surely.
Yeah, I know, 100%. So it was just a very strong performance from Racing Bulls in general, I think, over the weekend. It looks like they have a pretty good car, and whilst Verstappen and Lawson in the Red Bull seems a little bit peaky, trying to get the best out of it has not been easy. The Racing Bulls have been pretty consistently quick all weekend.
And I think Yuki Tsunoda feels that they've set the car up nicely for both qualifying and the race and feels very confident. So could you imagine a podium for Yuki Tsunoda?
I think, was I not one to predict such a thing on the preview show? I think I was.
Oh, hush now. No, you did. You're right. Absolutely. And he'll line up alongside or just ahead of Alex Albon in the Williams. I think another shock result because, again, off the back of testing, we all have these different ideas and predictions of what we've seen and what that might mean. And people said, yes, Carlos Sainz set the fastest time of testing, but that means nothing. Different track, different conditions. And actually, they've been there or thereabouts all weekend long. But P6 for Alex, and then Carlos Sainz, P10, obviously his first outing with the Williams team. They must take confidence from what they've done over the winter break to start the season like that.
Yeah, I think if anything, Carlos Sainz will probably be a bit disappointed that he's only 10th. I think the consensus just from talking to a few people in the paddock is that Williams do have good one-lap pace. They've got good qualifying pace. It might not translate as well once we get into the race, and the Albons of this world may well fall back behind the Ferraris that they're currently ahead of on the grid. So that may be something to bear in mind come Sunday, but I think this showcases that Williams really are being true to James Vowles' words at the moment. They are a team in transition and they're moving forward and they're laying the foundations to be a front-running team again. And also the other point, I think this is quite crucial for Albon to start on the right foot as well. This is a big year for him alongside Carlos Sainz. If he can match Sainz and even beat him, I think this further cements the reputation he's managed to rebuild since joining that team.
He also said to me that actually this result's been 2 or 3 years in the making, and he said, yes, the signing of Carlos Sainz shows that the team's going in the right direction, but he says we've had engineers being signed. Of course, they've got James Vowles, who's really spearheading the campaign, but I said, that's such a positive sign. He said, yes, this is what you can expect from us probably in 2026.
Yeah, exactly right. And look, if you think about convincing Carlos Sainz to come from Ferrari to join Williams, a team that was pretty much consistently down the back, they will have had to tell Carlos some pretty promising stuff that's coming in the future. You're not expecting them to set the world alight this year, although it was a good day for them today, but 2026 and beyond, Carlos Sainz will have been told about the investment going in, the plans from an engineering point of view, the people they're hoping to bring into that team. All of those elements are what build a successful championship contending team, and that's exactly what James Vowles is aiming at. So we could see a Williams resurgence over the next couple of years.
You might be wondering, they've missed out Ferrari. There's been a glitch in the podcast. No, my friends. It was P7 for Charles Leclerc and P8 for his new teammate, Sir Lewis Hamilton. What happened there? That wasn't what was predicted.
No. I think some people had Charles Leclerc for pole.
He had himself, I think he really was targeting a pole today, because when he arrived at the circuit this morning, I grabbed a word with him on the Melbourne Walk where all the fans hang out to get a picture and a selfie and autograph from the drivers, and really the target was pole for him. And I asked him, what was the problem today? And he just said lack of performance. It's so strange, isn't it, from one day to the next?
Yeah, I think the difference between the two of them, so it was about 2/10 between Lewis and Charles, so let's look at that first. That may be to be expected because Lewis has got an awful lot to learn coming to a new team, and not just any new team, but a team with a very different culture, a language barrier, new engineers, and of course new technology in terms of a Ferrari power unit. So all of that is a massive learning curve. He'll close that gap, I have no doubt, over time. But the team will be disappointed because the performance from Charles Leclerc in FP3 was right up there amongst the McLarens and amongst the Verstappens of this world, and it was looking like he had everything there to be able to deliver. Something went wrong. On his actual flying lap, I think he made a mistake and he aborted it. So I think maybe there's more performance to come from Ferrari. He just wasn't able to deliver it when it really mattered today.
Yeah, I think Mark's kind of covered it there. I think the more important thing to look at is the gap that Hamilton has been able to close down. With every session since FP1, he's gotten closer and closer to Leclerc, even between Q1 to Q2 and Q3. So I think that's quite encouraging, at least for Lewis, his first outing with Ferrari. But I think they'll move forward in the race. They've got better race pace. They won't be behind the Racing Bull. They won't be behind the Williams. They'll both get good starts, and then it'll be a case of making sure their strategy in there and they work together as a team and move them up.
Well, let's listen to what Sir Lewis Hamilton had to say after that qualifying session, his first with Scuderia Ferrari.
I didn't set a target, just enjoy it, and I did. I didn't know where the gap would be, and of course wasn't expecting 9/10, but it's good to know. It's something we can work on.
And in terms of tomorrow, obviously different conditions. Do you feel confident that you could perhaps work this new car in rain tomorrow around this track and score a big result?
I've never driven a Ferrari in the rain, so it'll be another first for me, which will be a challenge. I don't even know where the freaking wet setting is. So, that's really honestly how it is. Every day I'm learning something new about this car, and I didn't underestimate the sheer steep slope of the learning, but with all the effort that I put in, I thought I would be able to shortcut it, and it's just not the case. It's taken a lot of work over the weekend to build confidence in the car, learn where its strengths and weaknesses are, and it's definitely been a challenge, but that's what it's about.
That was Lewis Hamilton talking to me a little earlier on. It was interesting. It wasn't frustration so much on his face. It was more sort of, I've got a bit of a challenge on my hands here. And I think he felt, as he said, he'd spent so long over the winter break immersing himself with the team and integrating himself that perhaps he felt it might have been easier. But it is going to be such a steep learning curve for him, isn't it, Mark?
Well, it is going to be a big learning curve. He's also got a very, very strong teammate in Charles Leclerc who's well established at that team. So overhauling that is going to be difficult anyway. And I think, look, if you look back at Lewis's recent career at the end of his Mercedes time, qualifying wasn't really his strongest point. In the race, he's a different animal. We know how good he is, how much experience he's got. That really plays out in a race situation, and even more so maybe when it's wet. So we maybe haven't seen the last of what Lewis can deliver this weekend.
We talk about, a new team, a new culture to sort of work in, and he was asked by someone just along from me in the media pen if he'd come up with a new word for hammer time in Italian, and he was laughing and he's like, I don't know, I'm not sure. He's like, maybe just for now it'll just be push. So listen out for that tomorrow when he's being told to push around the Albert Park circuit. So P8 for Lewis Hamilton, and just rounding out the top 10, it was Pierre Gasly in the Alpine, and as you've mentioned already, guys, Carlos Sainz P10 for Williams, his new team for this year. But I want to have a chat about the rookies, some of the standout stars. I'm going to go first, and obviously you can tell me what you thought of his performance. But Isaac Hadjar, P2 in Formula 2 last year, and he's the fastest rookie on the grid today, and I think has been really strong all weekend long already, Harry.
Le Petit Prost, they call him in the French media. I actually am pleasantly surprised. I think a lot of people kind of written him off a bit, to be honest. I know he had good pedigree in Formula 2, but he was the last driver signed for this year while Red Bull figured out what they were going to do with their situation. And he'd been up there with practice. He's a little bit off Yuki, but that's to be expected. Tsunoda's way more experience. Hadjar's been quite clear when we've heard him on the radio when it comes to his feedback and the engineers, and that's something that's been brought to our attention, is that maybe is he a little bit fiery over team radio sometimes. So far, so good. Hasn't put it in the wall, hasn't had any near misses or offs. Really impressed with Isaac Hadjar.
And I'll just add to that, if you look at the way that Liam Lawson struggled today in the main Red Bull car, both of those guys at the Racing Bulls will already have half an eye on an opportunity that may present itself to move up later in the year.
Sending a little email here or there to the powers that be at Red Bull, saying, just want to remind you of what I've done. And actually, Isaac Hadjar saying they've got a great car. So really positive signs for the newly named Racing Bulls. A little further down the order, Jack Doohan's the next rookie, P14. I think he got hampered by those yellow flags that came out for Lewis Hamilton's spin, so maybe there was more on the table there for the Alpine rookie.
Yeah, I think so, but again, I actually think he's done all right so far. He hasn't looked out of his depth. He's been up there throughout the practice sessions, and I think he was a little bit caught out in those final flyers. I don't think he should be disappointed and too downhearted with not being where Gasly is. I think he'll move forward in the race, and I actually think that's a solid outing for Doohan to begin with.
Yeah, agreed. All he can do really is progress. That's what he needs to be doing, having progression in every session, and I think it's fair to say he did that this weekend so far.
and he finished just ahead of Gabriel Bortoleto in the Sauber, who I have to say I think is a standout. I know he seems like he's behind two of the other rookies and only starting from P15, but actually P15 in a Sauber, which is obviously difficult to drive because his teammate Nico Hülkenberg was behind him in P17. So that's a great outing for the Brazilian.
His teammate, who by the way is one of the most experienced guys on the grid. So yeah, how about that in your first weekend? So that's a very good start for him.
And unfortunately not making it through into the second part of qualifying was Kimi Antonelli. So much has been made of the young rising star at Mercedes, but it wasn't to be today. But actually we can pinpoint it on the damage that he sustained. Cost him his last two flying laps, really, Harry. So don't write him off yet, right?
Don't write him off yet, not the start he would have wanted. It'd be quite fun to see him come through the field if we can. But I have to say, I think we've already mentioned Lawson, but I think the worst weekend winner is probably Ollie Behrman so far. It's been rough for him, and I think it's going to be, if he can start the Grand Prix, a long 58 laps for the Haas driver.
A gearbox problem for Ollie Behrman at the beginning of qualifying, unable to move the car into fourth. So reliability issues in quali, and of course there were some performance issues from himself earlier in the weekend, which he fully owned, I have to say. He said, he just didn't do a good enough job. So he will be looking to make up places tomorrow, but it will be difficult because, as we've said, it could well rain, and those spots of rain seem to have gone away, guys. So it's now looking rather sunny, and it's going to be a beautiful sunset again here in Melbourne. And then a new day will dawn, and it will be the first race of the 2025 season. And just like a one-word answer, who's winning it tomorrow?
Lando Norris.
Oscar Piastri.
Well, there you go.
What about you?
I'm going to say Oscar Piastri. I just think this pace would go off. What a moment that would be. The Australian Grand Prix looks set to be an absolute thriller, and I think we are set for an exciting season as well. Do join us across the BBC on race day. We're going to go and enjoy the music, have some dinner in Melbourne, and get ready for the Grand Prix tomorrow. Harry, Mark, you look like you want to say something, Harry.
It's karaoke, isn't it? You're up next.
No, it's Kookaburra. This has been an IG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.